Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point. And yesterday, if you checked out the video, we went over the opening statements for the prosecution because, as you know, they rested their case on Monday and turned it over to the defense. And so we read the opening statements just to see or get an idea as to whether or not they proved their case. And as we saw in those opening statements, they made some promises that they knew they weren't going to be able to keep once they started questioning these witnesses that they had. And then at the end of the video, I went through like a brief summary of the different witnesses that testified and what evidence they were able to bring to the table. And then there's one thing I wanted to point out, because people keep saying it wasn't Lisa Van Allen in the tape that was shown on the, I believe it was the last day of the prosecution's case. And keep in mind, there was a videotape and then there was an audio tape that was played towards the end of the prosecution's case. And in the, I believe it was the videotape that was about Dominique. And then the audio, I believe, was about Lisa Van Allen. So it was both of them that were introduced via these recordings. And then it was one other thing I was going to tell you guys. Oh, and then I was reading up on some documents last night, and we were talking about the Dr. Chris McGrath who testified. And remember, he was R. Kelly's attorney, and he was the one that quote unquote diagnosed him with herpes. And so what I came across was that it was 2011 that I guess he made the official diagnosis, but prior to that he had diagnosed him with several other STDs, and that it wasn't until 2011 of the official diagnosis. And the reason that date was important was because, remember, Geronda Pace was with him in 2009, and she claimed that he gave her herpes. And so since the official diagnosis wasn't until 2011, I guess that was sort of to impeach her testimony about when she actually contracted the herpes. And then the Kiona girl was supposed to testify for the defense, but I'll get into that. I'll do like I did yesterday, where I read the opening statements and then I'll go over the testimony of the witnesses that the defense had and explain a couple of things to you guys about that. So we're going to pick up with Nicole Blank Becker, and she is the one that did the opening statements. And remember, you know, the media was really coming for her. You know, they were saying she did a horrible job, that she was up there for 2.5 hours, which I'm starting to doubt, because they're in 2.5 hours. Like, it's not going to take me 2.5 hours to read these notes. But they were really coming for her. And then once again on Twitter, Steve Greenberg found the need to once again try and throw Nicole and Thomas Farinella under the bus, basically saying that they, you know, were sent to sabotage, or they came to sabotage this case, and that they were almost successful, but hopefully Kanik pulled it out and saved the case, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, dude, let it go, because evidently whatever you had to say about Nicole and Thomas was not strong enough for the judge to throw Nicole off of the case. So let it go. Okay. And plus, any involvement that she had with Azriel and Richard Arline in that phone call was a bunch of nothing because it wasn't even really presented during the trial. And if it was presented, it didn't make a splash because we didn't hear nobody talking about it. So let's go ahead and get started. So Judge Donnelly, all right, we're ready to proceed with opening statements. Does the defense wish to give an opening? And then Nicole says, yes, Judge, thank you. And I already see Nicole's going to get on my nerves, so I might skip over all these yes, Judge, thank yous that she does. So then Donnelly said, go ahead. And then Nicole, thank you. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we don't learn in law school how to put the microphones on. So she's starting that wrong. So she says, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Then the jury collectively, good morning. Nicole, ladies and gentlemen, my name is attorney Nicole Blank Becker, and I am one of 4 attorneys who are here today defending our client. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you who is sitting at the table. We've got attorney Tom Farinella, who, ladies and gentlemen, has been working as a lawyer for over 20 years here in New York, federally and statewide. Additionally, we have Devereaux Klanick, a long veteran of both state and federal court, and started as a prosecutor. Donnelly, I'm sorry. Can I see the lawyers at the sidebar, please? Lord Donnelly. So this took place outside the hearing of the jury. And she said, so you can't make those kind of remarks in an opening statement. You're supposed to talk about what you expect the evidence to prove and not talking about everybody's backgrounds as lawyers. It's just not appropriate. But you can certainly talk about what you think the evidence is going to prove, but let's not have any more bios, okay? Now, didn't the prosecutor start out by introducing everybody at the table and saying what their role was? Anyway, so Nicole says, okay, you remember when the prosecutor did her opening? She described what she does and who she is. Donnelly, no, she did not. She said she was an assistant United States attorney. And then Donnelly replied, no, she did not. She said she was an assistant United States attorney. You've already said you're a lawyer. But we don't do resumes in an opening statement. So what I would like to you do, I don't like to interrupt lawyers during opening statements, but that's just improper. Let's go ahead. So the sidebar concludes. And then Nicole, may I judge? Donnelly, yes, go ahead. Nicole, thank you. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to leave out Calvin Scholar, who is with us as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you that the fundamental reason that we are all here today is because the government wants you to believe that our client, an internationally known singer, someone that they want you to believe is the leader of some large enterprise similar to John Gotti, the head of a mob family. Ladies and gentlemen, by charging Mr. Kelly, an internationally known singer, as the leader of an enterprise, the evidence would show that this is uncharted territory. You're not going to hear any evidence of anybody who comes in here and tells you about their experience with these kinds of charges. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask that throughout this trial, my team is going to ask that you listen carefully to how the government puts on their case. In an attempt to paint Mr. Kelly, our client, who sits at the defense table, out to be some singing boss, it will be clear that the government would not be able to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and here's why. What the government wants you to believe and stood up here and will ask questions about throughout this trial, the government is going to tell you that Mr. Kelly himself is being charged with what is known as a RICO statute. RICO, ladies and gentlemen, a statute that is and was used and founded for organized crime that the government is also charging Mr. Kelly with, something that you will learn is called the Mann Act. Again, 110-year-old charge. Gettys. Objection. Donnelly. Sustained. Nicole. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to explain to you and break it down what the defense believes the evidence is going to show, and I'm going to break it down by who so that 1 + 1 = 2. Maybe it that easy for you because I know and our team knows that words like enterprise, trafficking, transportation over state lines, those sound like some pretty serious charges. Okay, let me stop here. I think that the court reporter, Nicole has a very strong or very thick accent. And so I think the court reporter is having trouble picking up on her words. Whatever recording device she uses to type up the transcript, I think is having trouble picking up some of the words that she's saying. And her accent is so thick that I'm not even going to try and mimic it. So then she goes on and says, let me show you how the government's going to have a difficulty proving their case. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is going to show that the government wants you to think that Mr. Kelly single-handedly directed a very elaborate scheme, a scheme that was all hidden behind R. Kelly, the singer. Ladies and gentlemen, the whole purpose, they will tell you, of promoting Mr. Kelly's music for years and years and years and years was designed to recruit women and girls, fly them from state to state, country to country, all for one purpose, so he could have illegal sex activities with them. Ladies and gentlemen, you will see for yourselves, not just me standing before you and telling you that the idea, the notion that individuals are going to get on the stand and they are going to tell you enough concrete evidence that Mr. Kelly is part of this huge conglomerate, I suggest to you it's not going to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that you're going to hear about several gaps in the government's case. Specifically, part of what they have to prove to you is that there was a continuous, ongoing enterprise. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you that you are not going to hear from one person on that witness stand who is going to say, I've been with Mr. Kelly for 30 years, almost as long as he's been singing. Why is that important? Ladies and gentlemen, why do I care to stand here and tell you about that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's part of what they must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt, a continuous and ongoing enterprise. Additionally, ladies and gentlemen, you're also going to hear this case starts with allegations from 1993. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear from that witness stand that Mr. Kelly, although he had begun singing in the early 90s, he stopped his career. He actually played professional basketball. And you'll hear individuals on the stand tell you that from 1997 to 1999, he wasn't singing at all. He wasn't allowed to sing when he was doing his professional basketball. And why is that important? Again, must be ongoing, continuous. Can't have something happen here in the 90s. Let's wait 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and call it an enterprise. That's not what the law would tell you. Those are details, ladies and gentlemen, that you must pay attention to. The details in this case, we anticipate, are going to make you think of yourself, is there something else? Think to yourself, is there something else? Did I miss something? But ladies and gentlemen, if you don't believe this element, this part that we're talking about right now, the fact that there was some ongoing and continuing enterprise, then ladies and gentlemen, you have to be the ones to stand up, raise your hand in that jury room and say, I didn't hear that, or I'm following the law. The law doesn't say that. The evidence that you're going to hear throughout this trial, we believe, will make it nearly impossible for the government to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. We believe that the witness that take that stand, they will not hold up to scrutiny. In fact, we believe their testimony will crumble when it comes to cross-examination. We suggest that there will be so many untruths told to you, ladies and gentlemen, that even the government won't be able to untangle the mess of lies. Oh, God. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that each witness who comes into this courtroom and who takes the stand swears to tell the truth. You, ladies and gentlemen, ultimately get to be the only ones determining if you believe that they are actually the truth. If you decide that you don't believe everything or even just part of what a witness says, you have the ability, and the law and your honor will tell you, you as jurors have the power to decide who you believe, that you believe, what you believe, and how much you want to believe. As sworn jurors on this case, you have one of the most awesome responsibilities. And when you listen to both the direct, which is when the government asks questions, and the cross-examination by the defense, you will wonder, where is the proof? Where is the proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Now, the government, they will, we anticipate, parade witness after witness after witness to that witness stand. And they will attempt, we believe, they will attempt to put a square peg into a round hole. Ladies and gentlemen, as they do that, you will use your common sense, and it will be obvious that that's what's happening. You will ultimately come up with one conclusion as you watch witness after witness come forward untruths, after untruths, after a little bit of truth, and more untruths. What if the government isn't able to fit all of their witnesses into this round hole? It will be obvious that these charges are overreaching. While the government will showcase basically every witness as they come up, you'll get to hear them for yourself. Don't assume that everybody is telling the truth. I know that sounds like something that is obvious, but ladies and gentlemen, remember, when people talk, when people testify, you don't leave your common sense at the door. No, ladies and gentlemen, you come into a courtroom and you swear to tell the truth. And I hope that you hold them to that. Now, no matter how many witnesses the government may call, and I suggest and we anticipate it may be a number, a lot. Just because someone has 5, 15, 20 witnesses that take the stand, the law is actually, and the court will tell you, that you don't judge guilt or innocence based on the number of people that take the stand. You base it on the number of people, the testimony that you believe. Ladies and gentlemen, we suggest that you are going to hear a number of half-truths, exaggerated testimony. Listen, she should have took my line where I said I believe it was some half-truths and some whole lies going on. But she said exaggerated testimony. And we also suggest that the witnesses that you're going to hear from have an agenda. An agenda, ladies and gentlemen. I don't just pick that out of the air. You're going to hear that some of the witnesses, they wrote a book. A number of them wrote books. You're going to hear some of the witnesses would get cash from Mr. Kelly to pay for their family's bills or issues that were going on with them at home. You're going to hear some of the witnesses went on elaborate shopping sprees, and some enjoyed the notoriety of being able to tell their friends that they are with a superstar. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, what we believe the evidence is going to show is that these women, these witnesses who take the stand, he didn't recruit them. Ladies and gentlemen, you will hear that they were fans, that they came to Mr. Kelly. Now, did he pay for an airplane ticket? Yes, he did. Would he pay for a hotel or an Uber? Yes, he did. But ladies and gentlemen, does that mean that he was running some monumental enterprise? No. You won't see that or hear that when the judge tells you about the law. These witnesses, each one of them, specifically Jane Doe's, you will see that they had both a personal and financial bias to be in different relationships with Mr. Kelly. Now, the government will paint a picture, and the witnesses will take the stand and tell you all these negative things. In fact, they are going to form a picture that basically Mr. Kelly is this monster. Ladies and gentlemen, you are also going to hear that some of these relationships that Mr. Kelly had, they were beautiful. He actually had, which no one is talking about, long-term relationships with many of the Jane Does and individuals who take the stand. And the evidence is also going to show that these witnesses, they knew exactly what they were getting into. What do I mean about that? Ladies and gentlemen, it was no secret that Mr. Kelly had multiple girlfriends. Everybody, the witnesses that you'll hear from, they knew about that. It's no surprise. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll even know that Mr. Kelly was quite transparent. And he would tell the witnesses, the Jane Does, those he was intimate with, that there are other women that he's dating as well. From a man who you will hear has a very, very busy schedule, he had relationships that he tried to cultivate. How do you cultivate a relationship with a woman? Or the government wants to say a man, you bring them in to wherever you're working because you don't have one place. He doesn't have just one place, one office. No, ladies and gentlemen, he is on the road. You will hear most of the year when he's doing a tour. If he wants to see, or you'll hear they want to come see Mr. Kelly, it makes sense they hop on a plane and get to see him. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear that Mr. Kelly was married before. Not only was he married, he is the father of 3 children with his ex-wife. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not a secret that he wasn't trying to get married again, and each individual who came into his life was made aware of that. We believe that you will hear that the relationships that Mr. Kelly had with the various Jane Does were consenting relationships. These were individuals who knew what they were getting into. And I don't mean you may be thinking to yourself, well, you're going to hear that they were getting into some, as the government suggested, horrible types of relationships with Mr. Kelly. No, you will hear that they, the Jane Does, most of them, contacted Mr. Kelly. Sure, they did contact him because they received his phone number. Yes, how else in the 90s and coming into the 2000s do people contact each other? So the fact that these individuals who wanted to be in Mr. Kelly's life, whether or not we understand their reasoning or we agree with the reasoning, this is not a situation, and you will not hear that they were recruited. If by recruited, the government wants you to believe, that means that Mr. Kelly had an assistant who was responsible for keeping his daily routine up to par and on time. And the assistant was one who, if Mr. Kelly and or you're going to see the witnesses spoke with the assistant, if they wanted to come, or depending on what date, not only worked for Mr. Kelly, but you'll see that worked for the individuals coming to see Mr. Kelly. Yes, they dealt with one of his assistants. The government will have you believe that the assistant was part of this large enterprise. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest that you will hear from one of his assistants, if not more. And you will hear what her role was. Her job was an employee. Her job as an employee. And it will be nothing more and nothing less than anyone else that was standing in her shoes. It was for purposes of being an assistant. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've discussed how you're going to hear about a number of consensual relationships with adults. You're going to hear about how those relationships oftentimes ended. You will hear that when a relationship, not all, but when a relationship ended and it soured, those individuals became angry, resentful, and even spiteful. And that's when the evidence will show, and you will be able to see that's when they take advantage of their situation. We anticipate, ladies and gentlemen, that some of the witnesses that are going to take the stand, they are going to tell you, they are going to admit that they have stolen money from Mr. Kelly. They are also going to tell you that when they were in a relationship with Mr. Kelly, they had cheated on Mr. Kelly. These aren't things that you're going to hear are made up. They will tell you this themselves. You're also going to hear they are going to tell you they bold-faced lied to Mr. Kelly. Now, the other part that you're going to hear, that there were a number of relationships in which Mr. Kelly and the individual broke up and it was amicable. They are still friends. They formed lifelong relationships, but nobody wants to talk about that. The evidence is also going to show you that there was a clear, distinct difference between Mr. Kelly and his personal life, as we all have, and R. Kelly and his business life. Now, you're going to hear that Mr. Kelly had a persona, is what they called it. We know that he goes by the name of R. Kelly. Why, ladies and gentlemen? He's a singer. He is not the first, and he will not be the last person to do so. Now, you're going to hear that he had these relationships that had nothing to do with R. Kelly, the singer on stage. What do I mean by that? Why am I talking about that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear that the witnesses, that the individuals who testify, the Jane Does, they rarely, if ever, had anything to do with R. Kelly on stage. Did they go to the concerts? Did they travel with Mr. Kelly? Sure. In fact, I keep saying they. I should explain to you, ladies and gentlemen. Remember earlier I told you that you will hear that they knew about each other? You'll hear that they didn't just know about each other, they all became like a family. Sure, were some women not so interested in being in those kinds of situations? Yes, and they have a right to be. You'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that they ended their relationship because that's not what they wanted or signed up for. But you will also hear that the Jane Does and or other women and Mr. Kelly's life that the government is going to put on the stand, they were part of his personal life. His personal life. If you notice on the charges, is not on trial here. His personal life is separate. He is not being charged individually. The charges are grandiose. We can't be the leader of his own. He can't be the leader of his own enterprise and the enterprise. It's not how it works. Donnelly, I'm going to caution the jury. I'll instruct you to the law at the appropriate time. Go ahead, Miss Becker. Now, child, what was the point of that interruption? Goodness. So then Nicole continues. Thank you, Judge. You're going to hear that the witnesses in this case, they will take the stand and they are going to tell you all about their experience, their personal experience with Mr. Kelly. I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, we believe the evidence is going to show that they had relationships just like anyone else. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, just because the witnesses, the Jane Does that he dated, just because they came to the concerts with him, they sat in the audience and would watch and support, it doesn't mean they are part of the show. Just as much, ladies and gentlemen, as my family isn't part of me being a lawyer, there is a clear distinction, and that distinction is important. When Your Honor tells you the law, you will see how important it really is. Now, if the government is unable to prove to you that Mr. Kelly's personal life and his business life are not interchanged, that they are not interchanged, they are two separate things, guess what? Fails. Donnelly. Again, Miss Becker, I will instruct the jury on the law. Please confine yourself to arguing what you expect the evidence to prove. Nicole, thank you, Judge. We expect, ladies and gentlemen, that the witnesses will take the stand. They will look at you in the eye. They will swear that they are telling the truth. In fact, they are going to tell you they were victimized. They are going to tell you about a number of horribly sounding things that they experienced while with Mr. Kelly. In fact, they are going to allege that he would take their phones and they wouldn't have a phone to call anyone. They are going to allege that they were starved and they couldn't eat unless they were told they could. You're going to hear that they were in locked rooms in secret places and they weren't permitted to leave the room without permission. You're going to hear that they weren't allowed to even look at other people, let alone other men. And you're going to hear that they were made to urinate in cups or buckets. Ladies and gentlemen, you will see and you will hear that all of their stories, all of their explanations are going to sound kind of bizarre. Now, they are going to use the same buzzwords, and you may as you listen to that, think to yourself, well, whoa, it must have really happened if they are all saying similar things. But ladies and gentlemen, remember, you were asked questions initially when we were trying to find a jury about the media, about TV, anything about it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you that those who take the stand, they are going to tell you they have seen, read, or even personally been involved in all that stuff that we were asking you guys about. And why is that important? Why am I bringing that up? Because, ladies and gentlemen, that all makes using those words, buzzwords, like I couldn't eat, it was a cult. Those buzzwords, they are amazing in the media. They are amazing on a TV show that some of these witnesses will tell you, talk shows that they went on. That is audience grabbing. Ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, they must come in here and testify in a courtroom, no matter what they heard or saw. This is a courtroom where they must tell the truth. Watch as this unfolds. Ladies and gentlemen, you're also going to hear that Mr. Kelly had rules that they must follow. The sound of that alone is pretty daunting. Rules in a relationship? Ladies and gentlemen, when the ladies, the Jane Does, take the stand, or the witnesses, and they tell you about the rules, here is another place to pay special attention to listen to how fantastical they tell you the rules are. Ladies and gentlemen, we suggest that they are Monday morning quarterbacking. What do we mean by that? Ladies and gentlemen, we suggest you'll hear from the stand that when things didn't get to be the way they wanted, I don't know, maybe they wanted the relationship to continue and it couldn't. Ladies and gentlemen, when the witnesses were in a relationship with Mr. Kelly that worked, nobody would testify they complained about some rules. But guess what? When that relationship, that sexual relationship ended, now what? All the private conversations, the private understandings that they would have with someone they are dating and sexually active with, it's time to start talking to the public about it. And when you tell someone that you had to wear baggy clothes, you're going to get someone's attention. But ladies and gentlemen, what you also have to listen to is what we call the totality of circumstances. What do I mean by that? Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear, yes, a lot of the girls ended up wearing baggy clothes, but not because it was a rule. You'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that concerts that Mr. Kelly would put on had thousands, if not tens of thousands of people that would go to them. And ladies and gentlemen, you will hear the witnesses will tell you that it wasn't always so fun to be ushered amongst the crowd to get into the seats so they could watch their man and his craft. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear that that was becoming a problem for the women. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in order for them not to have to feel like they're being looked at or watched or poked at, they wore baggy clothing. But because we're here for charges of a RICO, we have got to make the narrative different. And the narrative that comes from that stand is going to almost make everything seem shady. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout this trial, we're going to ask that you ignore what we're going to call the window dressing. You're going to hear so much drama from that stand. In fact, so much drama, it will almost take you off your path. But ladies and gentlemen, if you stick to your goal, if you stick to what you're here for, and you apply the laws as the court will give you, the drama will dissipate and the truth will be clear. We're going to hear from the witnesses that they hopped on a plane, that they drove their car to go see Mr. Kelly, that they checked in on their own to hotels and got themselves Ubers, all while claiming they were held in some secret room and couldn't get help. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the kind of drama that we hope after hearing each witness or while listening to them, you're able to put aside. We suggest to you that you're going to hear that the witnesses, they would go out They would get their hair done. They would get their nails done. They would go shopping without Mr. Kelly. And guess what? They would have with them, when they would do it, a cell phone. A cell phone that could essentially rescue them if that's the position they were really in. I want to address another thing. Another drama that you're going to hear about. And that is that one of the rules were that they had no go to the bathroom in a bucket or a cup, that they weren't allowed to use the bathroom. Ladies and gentlemen, you will hear from that stand that a number of the witnesses went with Mr. Kelly on long tours. And you're going to hear also, ladies and gentlemen, that because Mr. Kelly is scared to fly, the tour bus was the main transportation. Not only did he have a tour bus, but you'll also hear about a Sprinter van that traveled from location to location as well. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, you will hear that there were times when they are on one of their long tour drives in cities they weren't familiar with, and did someone in the Sprinter van that doesn't have a bathroom pee in a cup. Yes, you might hear that. It's not illegal though, ladies and gentlemen. Wait until you hear the law. It's not as nefarious, ladies and gentlemen, as the government would like you to believe. The tour bus, you will hear, the tour bus had a bathroom. So that part, when they testify about that, or if they testify about that, ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't make any sense. There will also be testimony that Mr. Kelly had employed what are called runners. Runners, which is a common term you'll learn in the music industry. Runners, basically, you will hear, they did what everybody else didn't want to do. They are equivalent to interns. They didn't get paid. Some of them they did. Ladies and gentlemen, you will hear that one of the roles of the runners included being at the receptionist desk, including ordering food and guests at the studios any guests at the studios needed. They also had to clean the studio. And yes, when they would clean the studio and they had to do the nitty-gritty work, a studio that you'll hear had enormous amounts of people in and out and in and out, then yes, a runner or two would take that stand and tell you that they recall when they were cleaning one of the buckets or the cups that they had to throw out or get rid of smelled like urine. Now, ladies and gentlemen, does that sound like the rules that you're going to hear by the women on the stand about not being able to go to the bathroom and having to pee in the cup? Or does that sound like what may happen in your vehicle when you drive on a long-term vacation? All right, Nicole. Now, you're also going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Kelly, he lived and has been living what some may call an extraordinary life. You will hear that he has sold millions upon millions of records. You will hear that he was number one in his craft. In fact, you're going to hear that he has so many fans that truly love and adore him, ladies and gentlemen. You are going to hear that he had music and wrote music that truly touched up and uplifted people's lives. Geddes, objection. Donnelly, sustained. Becker. Now, ladies and gentlemen, those are blessings, ladies and gentlemen, that you will hear. Donnelly, sustained. I sustained the objection to that. Move on to something else, please. Oh, Lord have mercy. Okay, so Nicole continued. When Mr. Kelly grew up, which is something you're going to hear about, and ladies and gentlemen, you are going to hear the court tell you that sympathy, feeling bad for someone, cannot play a role at all in your deliberations. But when you hear, and you will, about Mr. Kelly and how he worked his way to being who he is, the discipline that Mr. Kelly was involved in, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're talking about when I say the totality of the circumstances. Mr. Kelly, you will hear, started on the streets of Chicago. Donnelly, could I see the lawyers at the side, please, with the court reporter? Oh my God. Guys, hold on while I go turn my air conditioner down because I am getting stuffy. Okay. So the following happened outside the hearing of the jury. Okay, Donnelly, what's your objection? Geddes, my objection is I don't know how this has any relevance whatsoever to the case, nor how it's coming in. Donnelly, well, I am curious about that. Is he going to testify? That's the only way that will come in. Nicole, no, they have a witness, Demetrius Smith, that is going to testify about his stuff, and specifically the reason we're even going back to 1993 is due to his testimony for Aaliyah. Donnelly, I made a ruling at the pretrial hearing that specific evidence of good conduct is not admissible unless you are calling somebody who is going to testify about his character. And there are particular rules that are going with that. But I specifically ruled that this was not permissible. It is certainly not permissible through someone else. I mean, if the defendant is going to testify about his life as part of his testimony, that's one thing. But you cannot have another witness come in here and say that he grew up on the streets of Chicago and worked hard. It is just not permissible. And I frankly already ruled on it. So stop doing that, please. Geddes, can I just address one other thing? You're not planning to reference his own upbringing. Becker, no. Geddes, just want to make sure. Donnelly, do you know about how much longer you're going to be? Nicole, maybe half an hour. Donnelly, all right. I just want to see if we were going to be able to start a witness. Okay, great. Nicole, okay. And the sidebar concluded. So, Nicole, may I judge? Donnelly, yes, go ahead. Nicole, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk a little bit more specific. Let's talk about each individual Jane Doe that you will hear from on the witness stand and what we anticipate the evidence will show. Ladies and gentlemen, the first charge that has been presented to you by the government has to do with bribery. Bribery, ladies and gentlemen, and it dates all the way back to 1994. Ladies and gentlemen, when you hear that testimony and when you hear how long ago the crime that they are alleged occurred, require them to prove the specifics to you because, ladies and gentlemen, use your common sense. If Mr. Kelly was involved in a crime back in 1994, would we be here today? Objection! Sustained. Nicole, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to find that when it comes to Aaliyah, Jane Doe number 1, the government suggested that you're going to hear that she was pregnant and that was the reason for a false marriage. Ladies and gentlemen, Aaliyah, God rest her soul, she passed away. She's not going to be here to testify from that stand, ladies and gentlemen. Hold them to having a witness that is going to say that she was pregnant. Now, did she have friends that she probably talked to? Does she have family? Of course. But ladies and gentlemen, there will be no evidence, no proof that any of that is true. Now, I wish I could say that when Aaliyah takes the stand, she could tell you that herself, but instead, ladies and gentlemen, under the circumstances, under the way the government has chosen to charge Mr. Kelly with a very, very serious, Donnelly, sustained. There was no damn objection, Judge. The charges are what they are. Please talk about what you expect the evidence to prove. I will instruct the jury on the law. Go ahead. Nicole. Thank you, Judge. Make sure you listen to the few witnesses that they are going to have for the bribery charge. You will see that RSK, which is the enterprise that they are suggesting, objection. Donnelly, overruled. Nicole, that Mr. Kelly was the head of, was somehow involved in this illegal request of a state employee to change an ID. Listen to the very minute important details of that testimony. And we suggest that you won't hear enough. you won't hear the truths that will allow them to succeed on that charge. And if they can't prove that charge beyond a reasonable doubt, you ultimately will have to find Mr. Kelly not guilty of that charge. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you are also going to hear from Jane Doe number 2. Jane Doe number 2, ladies and gentlemen, you will hear had met Mr. Kelly. In fact, you'll hear that she met him initially, but it wasn't until I believe it was about a year or so later at a coffee shop. Ladies and gentlemen, you are going to hear that they exchanged phone numbers there and that she called Mr. Kelly. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear that they dated for 6 or 8 months. And when I said dated, she came to see Mr. Kelly often in different states. Now, you're going to hear how the way that she ended up getting to come and deciding to go visit Mr. Kelly was she showed up at a Nike store. The Nike store in Chicago up on Michigan Avenue, and that's where she exchanged phone numbers. Although I indicated they talked at the coffee shop, but nothing actually came about until Nike. Now, the government has told you, and they expect the evidence to show that Jane Doe number 2, she formed a relationship with Mr. Kelly because she had a friend that she wanted to introduce to Mr. Kelly who was a good singer. Ladies and gentlemen, you are also going to hear that when she ended up going to visit Mr. Kelly, you won't see a plane ticket for her friend. You won't hear testimony from that stand that her friend ever sang for Mr. Kelly. No, ladies and gentlemen, that was a relationship that she formed and that ultimately ended. Let me stick a pin here. I think Nicole talked too much, because basically the stuff that she was saying, oh, you're not going to hear this, you're not going to see that, then that gave the prosecution the opportunity to go back and tell the Jane Doe witnesses, oh, tell them that your friend did sing for R. Kelly. Tell them that your friend did do this or did do that. So in this, I think Nicole overreached and she overtalked a little bit. Well, a lot. Okay, so now with Jane Doe number 2, you're going to hear, and the allegations are that there was a sex tape video. In fact, the allegations are that she was exploited, is the word under the law, that Mr. Kelly intentionally and knowingly coerced her into having sex. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe the evidence will show quite the contrary. And that's why. Ladies and gentlemen, we need you to use your common sense when you hear about the relationship that Jane Doe number 2 had with Mr. Kelly. Okay, let me stick a pin there. Nicole keeps saying, use your common sense. Remember the infamous meme that came out of the interview with Gayle King, where he was saying, use your common sense. I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing that she keeps reiterating, use your common sense, because if any of those jurors saw that interview, then they're going to remember that. So I don't know if that's a plus or a minus in this case. You guys let me know what you think. So now you are also going to hear about Jane Doe number 3. Now, Jane Doe number 3, Mr. Kelly's charged in the indictment with regards to Jane Doe number 3 with secretly confining her. He is charged with confining her for the purpose of kidnapping her. Ladies and gentlemen, we anticipate that you're going to hear that she came to the studio in Chicago, Mr. Kelly's studio, in the hopes of getting to know Mr. Kelly. Initially, she'll tell you it was because she worked at a radio station and her boss at the station wanted her to come and go find Mr. Kelly or interact with Mr. Kelly in an interview. The interview was declined, you will hear, but she continued to talk to Mr. Kelly, and over weeks, if not months, they decided that they would get together. When she got on that plane, of which nobody forced her to do, she ends up in Chicago and she goes to the studio, she says. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we anticipate that you're going to hear that when she got to the studio, she was taken to one of the rooms there. In fact, the studio you're here, it has bedrooms there. It has, I want to call it like hanging out rooms with couches. There were several parties that happened at those studios, and you'll hear that she was escorted, or taken by one of the runners to the room to wait so she could meet and be engaged to talk to Mr. Kelly. Now, you're going to hear that she waited hours, and then it sounds like she's going to tell you it was days where she was locked in a room, a secret confined room. That's what the law says. And she couldn't do anything. She couldn't eat, she was starving, and she was not able to get out. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear she will also tell you she was comfortable enough that she went and took a shower, which was not in the room that she was waiting for Mr. Kelly. She'll tell you, yes, she went to the bathroom, again, not in the room, and she's going to tell you that she had her cell phone the entire time. Not only did she have her cell phone where she could have called the police if she was in some kind of danger or felt like she was being held against her will, there was a phone in the room. This was back when there were phones that actually connected to the wall. She's also going to tell you, Nicole, there are still phones that actually connect into the wall. She's also going to tell you that she used the phone. She'll tell you she called the front desk, the reception area where the runners are, almost as many as 80 times. Where is Mr. Kelly? Where is Mr. Kelly? She also was hungry, and you'll hear that they ended up getting her Chinese food and the drink. She'll tell you that didn't have any ice. There's a reason why I bring that up. The allegations are that Mr. Kelly, when he kidnapped her, when he locked her in the room, because I believe she's going to tell you the doors only lock from the outside in. Hold the government to that, please. I suggest that you won't see one picture or one other person tell you the same. So, ladies and gentlemen, the other part of the charges against Mr. Kelly with Jane Doe number 3 is that he engaged in fondling or touching her, and she was drugged. Ladies and gentlemen, you would not hear her take the stand and tell you that she knows that she had any kind of sexual relations with Mr. Kelly. No, you're going to be asked to make assumptions based on what she tells you. I believe the government said she woke up and there was some liquid coming from her private parts. Ladies and gentlemen, don't let the government prove a case to you or try to prove a case to you based on, I think we had sex. It feels like I might have had sex with him. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear her tell you she felt and believed she was drugged. Hold the government to that, ladies and gentlemen. Make the government show you beyond a reasonable doubt that she is, in fact, true. That is, in fact, true. And when you see that they can't, when you see that this is a narrative, you won't be able to find Mr. Kelly guilty of that charge. Now next, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to move on to Jane Doe number 4. Now, you're going to hear not 1, not 2, not 3, but I can't even count as high as number of untruths, stories that you're going to hear from Jane Doe number 4 on that stand. Ladies and gentlemen, she is going to tell you from her own mouth. She will admit she's a liar. She's lied to Mr. Kelly. In fact, she's going to tell you and admit that she was a super fan. She'll tell you since a young age, Mr. Kelly's music has been around her family, friends, and neighborhood, and she listened to it, and that this music was everything to her. You're also going to hear her tell you that she was completely enveloped in her passion for R. Kelly, the singer. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, the proverbial word groupie, which we don't usually like to use, but it's a word, it's an understatement when it comes, you will see, to Jane Doe number 4. Jane Doe number 4 is going to tell you about how she met Mr. Kelly. In fact, she's going to tell you that there was a court procedure and she heard that it was going to be, excuse me guys, was going to be in Chicago where she lived at 14 years old. And she wanted to get a chance to support Mr. Kelly. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, she is going to tell you that she went to the hearings every day. She skipped school. Mom and dad, mom didn't know about it. She lied to her parents. She lied to her mom. I believe her father may have passed, so I apologize. I'm not sure. But she'll tell you she lied to her mom, who she had a very close relationship with, she'll tell you, so she could pursue her passion, Mr. Kelly. In fact, Jane Doe number 4 is going to tell you that she was even personally acknowledged by Mr. Kelly and that he promised her a signature or autograph. You're going to also hear, ladies and gentlemen, that there were other women who were as supportive as Jane Doe number 4 of Mr. Kelly. They had a forum, you'll hear, on the internet for R. Kelly supporters. She met and befriended people from that forum. It will be obvious when she takes the stand that she possessed a special passion for Mr. Kelly. Now, regards to Jane Doe number 4, she wrote a book. She talked to several talk shows, one of which you will hear is a talk show that she was on that had nothing to do with Mr. Kelly. Ladies and gentlemen, why the media stuff is so important in that aspect is because you're going to see how Jane Doe number 4's story is like a snowball. It's small. It's, I met R. Kelly. Oh, I saw R. Kelly. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The lies, the untruths that she attaches to herself and Mr. Kelly. You'll see them unfold. Guys, why when I was reading that, I had a vision of that gift from Real Housewives of Atlanta with, where oh my God, Candy, they're at the reunion and she goes, the lies, the lies, the lies. I'm sorry. Nicole talking so much, I just got to break up the monotony, okay? So anyway, let's continue. Wait, hold on a second. Okay, then Donnelly jumps in and she says, Miss Becker, I hope this is a good time to break. And then Nicole says, sure. Donnelly, I am going to excuse the jury for lunch so you can have a seat. Nicole, thank you. Donnelly, all right, folks, I am going to excuse you for lunch. Again, please do not talk about anything having to do with the case, but have a good lunch and we'll be back here at 2:15. All right, see you then. The jury exits and then Donnelly, all right, anything before we break for lunch? Canick, no, Your Honor. Geddes, Miss Geddes, no, Your Honor. Donnelly, all right. How much longer do you think you have, Miss Becker? It's been going on a little while. As long as you want is fine. No more discussions about the law at all. But I am just trying to get an idea of when we'll get the witness on. Nicole, Judge, I talk slow, so. Donnelly, well, can you use the microphone too? That's all right. Nicole, sorry, Judge. Donnelly, that's all right. Nicole, Judge, I know I speak slow and I'll speed it up. Donnelly, I don't want you to speak faster, and if you have more to say to the jury, I'm going to let you do that within the bounds of the rules. I am really just trying to figure out scheduling, that's all. Nicole, 25 minutes, Judge. We'll try to keep it at that. Donnelly, okay. And the first witness, Geddes, Geronda Pace. And Your Honor, there may be one issue that we're going to raise before Ms. Pace testifies. Are you still talking about Ms. Pace in your opening? Nicole, I think we just, Geddes, did we just finish? Okay, so Your Honor had previously ruled that evidence of the defendant's 2002 arrest and 2008 trial was not going to come in. However, I think the defense brutally attacked Ms. Pace's credibility, and part of what she's going to testify to is that she, of course, met the defendant at the trial and attended virtually every single day of the trial. But most importantly, when she last saw Mr. Kelly, he assaulted her, and then she then retained a lawyer to discuss that, if any option she had, and ultimately she received a civil settlement with Mr. Kelly. However, she did not pursue criminal charges against him, in large part because she had seen what had happened during the 2002 arrest and trial thereafter. And that greatly informed her how she ultimately resolved those charges. I anticipate, based on defense's opening, that she's going to be attacked again for pursuing that civil settlement, and it is going to be difficult to explain to the jury some of the reasons why she didn't go to the police. Donnelly, well, I don't know who is cross-examining her. Are you going to challenge the fact that she didn't go to the police? I don't know which one of you has the witness. Nicole, I do, Judge. Donnelly, all right. Just as a general matter, I made rulings pre-trial, some of them to protect the defendant, and I did notice that you were referring to that trial. I think I ruled that you should refer to it as a court proceeding, which is fine, but I think you just have to bear in mind if you start questioning her about why she didn't go to the police about it, if that's one of the factors, it could open the door. I have not heard the testimony, so I am not making a ruling on it now. But like in every case, you have to be mindful about the steps that I have taken to protect Mr. Kelly, and you can't use it as a sword. So I would be mindful of that ruling. They are subject to change if either side opens the door or something like that. So all right, have a good lunch. I will see you back here afterwards. And so everybody leaves for lunch. And then we pick back up with the afternoon session, and everybody rise because Donnelly is coming in. She says you can have a seat, and then she says, "Okay, is there anything before we bring the jurors in?" Canick, nothing from us. Donnelly, just about another 20 minutes on the opening. Becker, yes. Donnelly, great. Okay, great. Let's get the jurors. And then Geddes, Your Honor, just so you know, when the government calls our first witness, I understand that the CSOs are going to bring her through that door right there. Donnelly, yes. Then there was a brief pause in the proceedings, and then the jury entered the courtroom. They were told that they could be seated. Then Donnelly, all right, jurors, I hope you enjoyed your lunch, and I hope you got the chance to warm up a little bit. We are going to resume. Go ahead, Miss Blank Becker. Nicole, thank you, Judge. May I, Judge? Donnelly, go ahead. Nicole, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, just before lunch, we were talking about Jane Doe number 4. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is going to show that yes, Jane Doe number 4 on one occasion did go over to Mr. Kelly's house. It was a party, and she was there with a friend of hers. She was invited there not by Mr. Kelly, but by somebody else. That is the only time you will hear, ladies and gentlemen, that she was actually invited there. Why do I say that? You're not going to see any text messages between Mr. Kelly and Geronda Pace. Jane Doe number 4. Ladies and gentlemen, you're actually going to hear that she was at Mr. Kelly's house uninvited with a friend of hers. Her friend is going to testify as well, and you're going to hear what happened when they went into Mr. Kelly's home and took pictures of themselves in the house. And I suggest to you, you won't get to see any pictures of Mr. Kelly with Jane Doe number 4, other than the media might have taken some pictures. You'll see. You might see a picture of, or he posed for a picture and gave her a signature, something to that effect, but never, you will not see and you will not hear about any text messages. Why? Because, ladies and gentlemen, remember, she is a self-proclaimed fan. And I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that when you have someone on the stand who is self-proclaimed liar, and what I mean by that, she is going to admit she lied about her age. And that's an important factor here, ladies and gentlemen, because she's going to be asked about that. Listen to what she says. Now, I also got to tell you, I'm here telling you what you're going to hear from the stand, but sometimes with Jane Doe number 4, you never know. So I anticipate that she is going to get on the stand. She's going to claim she had this magnificent relationship with Mr. Kelly until it was time to write a book. She'll tell you about her book until you found out that there was a lawyer who is advertising for individuals who, if they felt they were victimized by Mr. Kelly, called this number, and she did. That's what I talk about. That is what I mean when they say the Jane Does, they have a motive. And Jane Doe number 4's motive is no different. Only we believe that it will be obvious when she testifies, and we try to get her to stick to a story. She can't do it. And why? Why? Because when you tell the truth over and over again, it's easy. You come in here and tell you guys the truth, but when you hear the number of times she changed her, even the minutia, even some of the small details snowball. Ladies and gentlemen, you get to be the judges of credibility, and I believe that when Jane Doe number 4 takes the stand, her credibility will be at issue. Now, I'm next going to talk about Jane Doe. I'm going to skip 5 for a moment, and I'm going to talk about Jane Doe number 6. Jane Doe number 6, you will hear that she met Mr. Kelly at one of his concerts. Her sister had backstage passes. She went with her sister. They got to go in what's called typically the green room, which is where you'll hear that's where a number of people go after a concert, whether it's to do an interview, sound bite for radio, or fans. She was there, and she ultimately exchanged numbers with Mr. Kelly. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, one of the elements in this whole thing, the whole enterprise, is that Mr. Kelly's people, and in fact, the indictment says his entourage recruited people, right? What you're going to hear, actually, that isn't always true. It's a nice umbrella to put all the Jane Does, but ladies and gentlemen, she exchanged numbers with Mr. Kelly himself, and she called him. You'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that ultimately they had a dating relationship. In fact, you'll hear they had a dating relationship for quite some time, and ultimately it ended. Now, she'll give you her reason for why she believed it ended, like other people. Oftentimes, there's two sides to a story. But ladies and gentlemen, when she takes the stand and she tells you about her reasons for why she believed it was over, I believe that you're going to add her to the saying, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, when Jane Doe 4 testifies, she will tell you that she learned about the other girls the other women that Mr. Kelly was dating. And when she learned about that, she was none too happy. Now, she's going to claim that she didn't know about them, ladies and gentlemen, but I anticipate that you're going to get a chance to see text messages and messages where she is on them with other girlfriends of Mr. Kelly. But ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, one of the things that she's going to testify is she's going to tell you that she believes that she is confident that she contracted herpes from Mr. Kelly. Confident. And that's even more, and what's even more interesting, and I hope listen to this testimony at this point, she's going to tell you that she knows exactly when she got herpes from Mr. Kelly the last time she was in New York. She's going to tell you guys that that's when she believes she contracted the disease, because ladies and gentlemen, one of the ways you'll see that Mr. Kelly is here before you in New York is because of Jane Doe number 6's claim. Now, Jane Doe number 6 is going to tell you about her relationships, and Jane Doe number 6 is going to look you in the eye and tell you that this is the man that gave her herpes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear from doctors, probably doctors both sides, and when you hear what they explain to you about herpes, in your mind, I hope you reflect back on what Miss Jane Doe number 6 said and ask yourself, does that make any sense? Use your common sense. We believe that your common sense is going to be a very important tool when it comes to Jane Doe number 6. Now, ladies and gentlemen, another interesting thing just to note, because it's a huge topic and something that's going to be asked about a lot regarding herpes. The individuals, the witnesses who take the stand and point to Mr. Kelly and say that's the person that gave it, that particular herpes to them, wait till you see how confident they are. And again, ringing that bell and listen to the doctors, what they tell you about herpes, and then the number of witnesses that are on that stand, you'll be able to just cross them off, I suggest. Now, let's move on to Jane Doe number 5. Okay, let me stop here. Was there a doctor other than R. Kelly's personal doctor and friend? Was there a specialist that talked about herpes in the case? I don't recall there being anybody else. And then the defense chose not to call the herpes expert that they were going to call in. And maybe they didn't call that person in because the government didn't provide a technical expert on sexually transmitted diseases. I'll go back through my notes, but I don't recall there being an expert witness on that. You guys let me know if you recall there being an expert witness called by the prosecution. So that might have been the reason they didn't call their expert. So she says, Jane Doe number 5, you will hear, was a long-term girlfriend of Mr. Kelly's. You're going to hear that the way she met Kelly was her parents decided to take her to one of his shows. They went to the show, her parents went as well. And during the show, you'll hear that Mr. Kelly has a part in his shows where people from the audience are allowed to come up on stage and dance or do, what people do on the stage at a rock concert. And you're going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, that Jane Doe number 5, she was up on that stage. You'll hear that. And not only was she up on the stage, you'll hear about her dance moves. And ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear, as a result of that, phone numbers were exchanged and her parents were aware of it. You're going to hear that. Objection. The objection is overruled, but please bear in mind the rulings that I made prior to trial. Let's move on to something else. Nicole. Thank you, Judge. You're going to hear that the way there, Mr. Kelly and Jane Doe 5's relationship began, it began on a lie. Now, keep you all in suspense. You're going to hear about when she takes the stand. You're going to hear and actually see what kind of relationship she had with Mr. Kelly. She was in an envious position, for lack of better words. She was super close with Mr. Kelly. You'll hear that they did everything together a lot. Driving the car, going places, she was there. And then it wasn't until she talked to Mr. Kelly and they, at that point, which was recently, Mr. Kelly had a relationship with Jane Doe number 5, but also another young woman, and they were friends. You'll hear Jane Doe number 5 and the other woman, they were all friends. But there came a point where Jane Doe number 5 drew a line in the sand, and Jane Doe number 5 told Mr. Kelly it was time to get rid of her. Not only that, you'll hear that she told Mr. Kelly she wanted her own place. And when Mr. Kelly told her he's not going to do that, the other woman is just as willing and supporting, is just as, I don't know what she's trying to say here, maybe loving and supporting as you are. He's not going to get rid of. Okay, sorry about that. You guys know how I be losing my place all the time. I don't know what button I'm hitting that's making the thing just scroll down. Or maybe I'm holding the down arrow too long. But anyway, where was I? So she told Kelly she wanted her own place. And when Kelly told her he's not going to do that, the other woman is just as, and I'm going to try to decipher what Nicole was trying to say here, because what they have typed makes absolutely no sense. So I think he said that Jocelyn was just as loving and supportive as Ariel is, and he's not going to get rid of her, break up with her. Then she says, with the other girl, and I know the lady told her to stop using that term girl. So not going to get this new apartment for Jane Doe number 5 to have by herself. Guess what happened? You're going to hear and you're going to see and you're going to hear she unraveled. No longer was she supportive. Was she close to Mr. Kelly? Instead, it was like the total opposite. And you're going to hear and you're going to her. Oh my God. And you're going to, maybe it was supposed to be, hear her talk about how I anticipate how horrible Mr. Kelly is. She's going to get to see the picture. You're going to get to see the pictures as well, the happy times, the good times, and somehow you will see that Jane Doe number 5 won't have it. That is not the reality she'll tell you. That relationship, even though you see the pictures, you hear that we're out together, all the other girls are, all the other women are, they're going to say yes, they seem like they were the closest. But wait till she testifies, and wait till you see and hear the web of truth, confusion, and unbelievability of that witness. Jane Doe number 5 is just another example, ladies and gentlemen, of someone who ended up having a motive. You're going to hear what her motive ends up being. And ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you that when you hear her testimony, that you put it in context and you hear the totality of the circumstances. You're not going to be able to believe her either. And if you don't believe the witness and there's a charge connected to that witness, you as jurors can say no and anticipate that that will happen if you listen to all of the testimony. Now, I apologize. I'm slow, but I just want to make sure you hear every word and it sinks in. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what we have described thus far is a number of women that are after revenge. Revenge. That word is going to make sense when you hear their testimony. Now, that's a big word, big shoes to fill. But I think after you hear everyone's testimony, the word will ring true. You're going to hear all sorts of things throughout this trial from that stand, and I suggest that some things you're going to hear have to do with Mr. Kelly's choice in partner. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, you're not going to hear anyone take the stand who is a male who is listed as a Jane Doe or John Doe in the indictment. No, you're going to hear from a number of other people, including the John Does, about Mr. Kelly's personal sexual desires. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear that there have been rumors. There have been several things like Mr. Kelly is gay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in a court of law. You'll hear yourself whether he is gay, bisexual, heterosexual, who cares? Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear that some of the sexual activities that Mr. Kelly and his girlfriends engaged in, there were others that were involved. Does that strike that? You're not going to hear that any of the witnesses, any of the Jane Does objected to it. Yes, now you may hear about issues that they have with it, but doesn't it make sense? Strike that. Doesn't it make sense? And you're going to hear and make sense of the fact that a red flag doesn't get waved until when? The breakup. And then you'll hear how Mr. Kelly enjoyed, wanted, was involved with men. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest to you, we hope that as you listen to the testimony, you will see that that topic, we call that fluff. The topic of his sexual preference is window dressing, and we hope that you see through that. Ladies and gentlemen, you're also going to hear about a number, and I'm sorry, I've just passed Jane Doe number 5. Now, you're going to hear about a number of civil lawsuits, and they will take the individuals who were involved with those, including Jane Doe's, will take the stand and tell you about it. And in fact, Jane Doe number 4 is going to tell you that she gave the money back. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, I suggest you're going to hear some details that you're literally going to say that doesn't make sense. Listen to yourself. Let the alarms go off. You're going to hear that certain words, certain verbiage was used between Mr. Kelly and his girlfriend's daddy. And somehow, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear from that stand that the word daddy has now become equivalent to the worst word you could ever think of. Daddy. I suggest to you, you're here. Nobody was complaining about having sexual relationships with him, with Mr. Kelly. But now, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a word that I believe you will hear from that stand is a common word a word you use oftentimes in sexual relationships, even not sexual relationships. In fact, you will hear that it's a common, nice way of referring to someone. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am confident that that word is going to be slung in the mud. That word is going to be another rule. Ladies and gentlemen, usually when you get rules, how to play the game, for example, how to perform in your job, usually you don't get rule number 1 at the beginning, and 6 months into the job, you get rule 7. That doesn't make sense. So, ladies and gentlemen, when they start to talk to you about all these horrible things that occurred, think about that and think about if that makes any sense. Now, you're going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. Kelly cannot read or write. You're going to hear, ladies and gentlemen, and you're from the stand that oftentimes, since he couldn't read or write, he literally came up with melodies and songs in his head. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear that he worked crazy amounts of hours because his process as an artist is very different. Wait, hold on, guys. Okay, I'm having technical difficulties here, so hold on a second. In fact, you'll hear that oftentimes he worked through the whole night of the not by himself with his engineers. You'll hear that when he would go on tour and with a tour bus, he'd bring his band and his engineer, and yes, girlfriends, and yes, his friends oftentimes. But ladies and gentlemen, what you're going to hear is the different Jane Does are going to tell you about how much time they spent with Mr. Kelly. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to see and you're going to hear the dates of different tours that he was on. Mr. Kelly was on the move a lot. The studio was where he created mentally, and because he was a mental cerebral thinker, that's how he does his music, in order to go from the bottom to the top. Dolly, can I see the parties at the side, please? Excuse me just a minute. First of all, you got to wrap this up. You've been going on for quite a long time. It's getting repetitive. Second, we're back into the world of talking about things that Mr. Kelly does or thinks that if he is not going to testify, they're not admissible. His process as an artist is completely irrelevant. I really do want to get going with some testimony. I'm asking you to wrap it up. Please don't do things that I keep telling you not to do. Is there anything else that you want to say? Geddes. I'll save this for after the court day, but I do have a concern with some of her arguments with respect to which are arguments with respect to the charges involving the exposure of sexually transmitted disease. I think that counsel completely misstated what the charge is and making the jury believe that we have to prove that he actually is the reason for someone contracting an STD, and that's not the charge. Well, if you're charging him for transmitting an STD and not telling people, well, I guess you're not charging him with transmitting the STD to them. You're charging him with knowingly having an STD and not saying it to them. So, okay. So anyway, Okay, let me go back. So the relevance of when the Jane Does contracted the STD doesn't matter, is what they're saying. What matters is that he didn't tell them that he had an STD, but if they had an STD prior to him, then they also had an obligation to tell him that they had an STD, correct? Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, Dolly. I've instructed them what lawyers say is not evidence, but I do expect the lawyers to follow the rule, and you just have to talk about the evidence is going to show, and you really have to wrap it up. Go ahead, Nicole. Thank you, Judge. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence that you will hear from that stand, Nicole ain't paying Judge Donnelly no attention. The government has to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt each and every element of each charge. We anticipate that there will be a lot of testimony coming from that stand, and I wish I could go through every little part of it, but that's what closing arguments are for. Ladies and gentlemen, ultimately, the charges that you are here to determine that the government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt, we suggest that is going to be a very tough pill to swallow. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America against Robert Sylvester Kelly, and that is some big shoes to fill. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we have you. And fortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we have you. You get to fill those shoes, meaning you get to listen and you get to interpret and listen to the facts. And we are confident that when you do that, you will see there is no enterprise. You will see and you will hear that the testimony does not line up with kidnapping or secret rooms. So we ask you to keep an open mind and listen to the testimony as it comes in. And that way we, as the defense, know Mr. Kelly will have a fair trial, and that is why we are all here today. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Judge Donnelly. Thank you. All right. Are you ready to call your next witness? Geddes, yes, Your Honor. Donnelly, your first witness. Geddes, yes, Your Honor. The government calls Jaranda Pace. And I say Jaranda Pace, and some of y'all say Jahanda Pace, but I think it's Jaranda. So anyway, that was the opening statement from the defense, and it was nowhere near 2.5 hours as the media was reporting. And then I just want to give you guys a quick run through of the defense, because we know that the defense put on a case that only lasted about 2.5 days. They only had 5 witnesses, and each day court ended early. So each one of these people were on the witness stand probably less than an hour, I would think. And so the 4 witnesses was a guy who was an aspiring actor whose record with Mr. Kelly was never released, because by the time they finished up on it and it was getting ready to be released, that was when Surviving R. Kelly and all of that was getting ready to roll out. And so they thought that, and it was obvious that he was under investigation and that some charges might be coming down the line eventually as a result. So he was not the only person. Now, I had never heard of him. His name was something like Denai Ramaman or something like that. And you know what? Hold on, because I do have some notes on that I was going to read to you guys. Let me pull that up real quick. Okay, I can't find my notes, but it was only 4 people that testified. The first guy, his name was something like Denai Ramanan or something to that effect. He had known Mr. Kelly for a very long time, and I guess he had helped around the studio, helped him with different things. And there did come a time where he he created a record, but the record was never released because of everything that was going on. And he was not the only person. There were other artists that Mr. Kelly was getting ready to release music on, whose career pretty much became sidelined as a result of Surviving R. Kelly coming out and then the impending charges against him. And so some of those people may have found other people to work with, but for the most part, I don't think most of that music has been released. And there was actually a couple of times where they were going to roll the music out, but then the federal charges came. And so people's careers were sidelined as a result of all of this. And then there was a point during his testimony where he asked to play the song. The judge was like, absolutely not. The media ran with that and tried to say that he was trying to play his demo in court. But the truth is that he basically just wanted them to hear the song that him and R. Kelly were working on as proof that there really was a record. And then the next person, and I might not be going in order, so it was him. Then there was a former police officer by the name of Larry Hood. And he basically testified that he was a childhood friend of R. Kelly's. At some point, he became a police officer. He offered security to R. Kelly, and that he would get other police officers to offer security. And we know that this is very, very, very common. Like almost every story that you hear about an incident with a person in the music industry and security is involved, you find out that that security person was an off-duty police officer. And even in the George Floyd case, Derek Chauvin, although he was a police officer he had a really long career as a police officer, but he also worked as a bouncer at a nightclub. So it's very common for police officers to work at nightclubs, work for, industry people as private security. And so in 2007, he had to leave the police force. But he said that he left in good standing, and he also is receiving his pension from the police department. But the issue that caused him to leave the police force was that he was charged with passing counterfeit bills. And he said that he pled guilty to the charge, but he didn't know that they were counterfeit bills. And the prosecution tried to say that that made him a liar and untrustworthy. But a lot of people settle cases just to get it over with. Like if you're not going to jail, why go through the trouble? But then I guess you go through the trouble so that it doesn't come back down the road where you need to testify, and then somebody is holding it over your head that you chose to dispose of a legal matter, that yes, I passed on the $100 bill, but I didn't know it was a fake $100 bill, that type of thing. So I didn't feel that that was damaging at all. And then the next two witnesses were employees. Okay, y'all know what? I just had it on my mind who these other two people were, and I have totally wait, hold on. Let me go back up here for a second. Oh, and then the Larry Hood guy, the police officer, he basically acknowledged that he knew, I believe it was Javante Cunningham, that he was around when Aaliyah was around, and he referred to Aaliyah and her little friends, and he referred to Javante as one of Aaliyah's little flunkies, the girls that were running around with her wanting to sing Bike Up for Aaliyah. And then they asked him about Javante's testimony about what, being at this apartment, and I guess her, Tiffany Hawkins, and some other underage girls, as well as Aaliyah, being at this apartment. And he said that he said that he didn't recall that. He remembered them being around, but he didn't recall the incident that Javante was talking about. And he said, as a police officer, he was a police officer during that time, and that he said he would have had to have taken action against that. And he said that I never had to take any action. I was never aware of any wrongdoing. And so they were basically trying to impeach his testimony by saying, oh, you were there when some of the crimes were taking place. And then remember, they're claiming that this criminal enterprise began in 1993. So I'm not sure why, why they're trying to bring up incidents that allegedly happened prior to this alleged enterprise. And actually, it wouldn't have been 93, it would have been 94. And why were they trying to bring up something that allegedly happened in 92 or 93? And then the other, I'm trying to think who the other two people, Jeff Meeks. So the third witness was Jeff Meeks, and he worked for R. Kelly in his studios from 2002 to 2010, and from 2014 through 2019. And what I liked about these witnesses is that these are people that have known him for long periods of time. And he worked for him up until Mr. Kelly was arrested. And he said that he started as an intern and was working his way up to the role of assistant audio engineer. And he was cross-examined by Mr. Scholar. And he asked Meeks questions about whether he had ever seen locks on the outside of studio doors and whether he had ever seen a woman locked inside a room. And he replied no. And he said that when he was working the phones, he took IDs. But then asked whether he had ever seen an underage female. Meeks again said no, and while he didn't inspect every ID, he said he didn't recall any underage girls. And so during Meeks' testimony, they said that he was very, like the way he held the microphone, they likened that to a talk show host. Like his demeanor was different, I guess, from other people that took the stand, and that he leaned back in his chair with the microphone opposed to how other people were kind of leaning forward. Not sure what difference that makes. And then they said he appeared to have a ponytail, which I'm not sure why that mattered. And that he gave very short answers. And then on cross-examination, he was asked whether R. Kelly had more than one female guest, and he replied that, he supposed he did have more than one female guest. And then he was asked, do you recall telling federal agents that Kelly sometimes had 3 or 4 female guests? And he says, I believe, I just don't remember. And then he was questioned about a time when he allegedly saw a girl asked to leave, as the prosecutors put it, and the prosecution asked whether he had asked a colleague, what do we do? And he said, I do remember that. And then the prosecution asked if, after the colleague told Meeks to let the person leave, were you relieved? And he says, I'm sure I was a lot of things, but I guess relieved was one of them. And then the prosecution asked him whether he knew about Kelly's conduct before they worked together in 2002. And Meeks said that he had heard of R. Kelly. Everybody did remember Space Jam. And then it was also said that a lot of people brought up Space Jam because that is what he is. Although in the R&B community, we know him as a sensational R&B artist. But a lot of people know him from that song, I Believe I Can Fly. A lot of people who are not into the R&B genre, they always point to I Believe I Can Fly as the song that they remember. And so then after Meeks, who was the person? I can't remember who came on after him. But there was one other person after the Meeks guy, and then the final person. So there were 5 people that testified, and I can't remember for the life of me who the other person was. And I don't have it written down in my notes who the other person was. But the last person to testify was Julius Darrington, and Julius Darrington is or was R. Kelly's A&R person, and he came in after Wayne Williams was leaving. Okay, Julius Darrington was the final witness who took the stand, and he, as I was saying, he came on to replace Wayne Williams, who I guess was leaving RCA and Sony and going to do something else. And so I'll just read these. This was from an article, I believe, on Court TV. That he was the final witness, Julius Darrington, who consulted on Mr. Kelly's final failed music project, testified for about 15 minutes. See, they weren't even on the stand that long. During his testimony, he told the jury he had worked with Mr. Kelly for about 10 to 12 hours every day, almost, starting in 2016 and lasting for about 4 years. Darrington, and that was up until he was arrested. And Darrington, who took the stand for the defense, said he had never seen Mr. Kelly abuse his girlfriends, but on cross-examination, he admitted he knew little about Mr. Kelly's personal life, as most people would know little about his personal life, because as Diana Copeland stated, her job ended at his bedroom door. Like, she don't know what was going on in his bedroom. And then they tried to break Julius, but Julius, he's an upstanding guy. I like Julius. And he basically is the only person that has really, really stood in the gap for R. Kelly as far as, talking about him on their social media. He does Instagram lives, where he is basically saying he's staying positive. He's a man of God. He's going to keep his brother uplifted in prayer. And so they tried to break him down. And, like one thing was Nadia Shahada was like, in fact, you have no knowledge of what happened behind closed doors when you weren't there, correct? And that would be correct for anybody. And he also talked about Mr. Kelly being in debt, $12 million in debt. And then, I think the other person that testified was the accountant. How did I forget the accountant? So there was an accountant that testified that was basically brought in towards the end of 2018. And he was another person that worked for Mr. Kelly until his arrest in 2019. And he uncovered that Mr. Kelly was $12 million in debt. And through all of his hard work and research, he was able to get that debt down to $3 million. And we know that some of that debt was tax debt. And so we know that his taxes were behind by several years. They were able to pay off all of his tax debt. And now his outstanding tax debt is what was owed for 2019, which he would have filed. Actually, there may have been a balance on the 2018 taxes that was remaining. And then now the 2019 taxes, which would have been filed in 2020. But he was able to get some of that debt paid off. And when Mr. Kelly was arrested, his debt was down to $3 million. And Julius testified that he sat in on those meetings with the accountant. And then a lot was coming out about, how many people were on the payroll. And then there was this octopus illustration that the accountant was using to help R. Kelly understand how his organization was run. And R. Kelly's business is called RSK Enterprise. And so he drew this octopus, and he was basically telling Kelly that he was the head of the octopus, and then the tentacles were the employees and all these people that he was paying. And then I'll also drop that image in this video so you can see what it is. And then, of course, when the prosecution started their closing arguments yesterday, they had the nerve to come out with this big billboard, kind of trying to mimic what the accountant had done, and basically putting Mr. Kelly in the center of the board, and then all these people that were supposed to be a part of his enterprise that they claim was not a criminal enterprise. And we'll talk about that in another video when I talk about them closing arguments. But basically, those were the 5 people that testified. They did not call the herpes expert. And I'm thinking that is because the government didn't call an expert witness. So there was nothing to refute there. And then you're just honing in and drumming in the whole herpes claim. And then they were supposed to have a psychologist to come in and refute what the government psychologist said, who basically gave this long testimony about mental and psychological abuse of sex trafficking victims. But she then turned around and said that she never met any of the witnesses. She never talked to any of the witnesses. She never examined them. She never read any of the transcripts. And so Judge Donnelly said that if they were bringing in that witness to refute or discount what the government's witness said, then she wasn't going to allow that. And so I think that's why they didn't call that witness in, because the sole purpose of her coming in would be basically to say, you can't count this woman's testimony because she didn't even talk to the victims. And to me, there is just so much misconduct in this case that it is ridiculous. And I'm sure Thomas Farinella has already written up like, if R. Kelly is found guilty, and let's pray that he's not, they probably already have the motions ready to file an appeal that they are probably going to shoot off like the day of the verdict coming down. But let's hope that it doesn't get to that. And so that was pretty much defense wrapped up. They started closing arguments yesterday, and then they talked about how Nicole was taking such a long time. But they went on for 3.5 hours yesterday with their closing arguments. And I was told that they only got halfway through the Jane Does, which means that they are going to get back on the stand today at 9 or 9:30. Probably be another 3.5 hours with their closing arguments. And then that's when the defense will take up, and then however long their closing arguments are, which will probably be the rest of the day. And then if the defense doesn't finish up, they'll be back up on Friday morning. Then the judge will give her instructions to the jury, and then the jury will get the case. And they may not get the case until later in the day. They may be sequestered because it's time to, decide the case, which means that they'll be put up in a hotel and cut off from their family and any outside communications. And so what would be interesting is whether or not they would start deliberations on tomorrow if the defense doesn't wrap up until tomorrow, because they would need to be able to pack their clothes, pack their toiletries, whatever they're going to need to deliberate, while they're in seclusion to deliberate this case. So depending on how closing arguments go today, it'll determine whether they start deliberating tomorrow, whether they have to be, off secluded somewhere at a hotel if they don't reach a verdict tomorrow, or whether or not the judge will just say they'll start deliberations on Monday. That all remains to be seen. So guys, that's it for me. Go ahead, leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And let me know, what did you think about the opening arguments by Nicole Becker and the defense team? So I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.